It was September 23rd, 1975. Madison Square Garden, New York City. 20,000 people packed into that arena, waiting for something they hadn't seen in years. John Lennon was returning to the stage. After 5 years of silence, 5 years of raising his son, 5 years of choosing family over fame. But tonight was different. The lights dimmed, the crowd erupted, and when John walked onto that stage, the energy felt like electricity running through every person in that building. He looked different than they remembered. Older, maybe, quieter in his movements, but his eyes still had that fire that had changed music forever. "Hello, New York," John said into the microphone, his Liverpool accent cutting through the noise. "Been a while, hasn't it?" The crowd screamed their response. Some were crying. Others stood frozen, unable to believe they were actually seeing him again. John had just finished Instant Karma, and the place was shaking with applause. He was sweating, smiling, feeding off the energy like he used to in the old days. But then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, the moment that would define this entire night. John sat down at the white grand piano positioned center stage, the same kind of piano where he'd written the song that had become an anthem for peace, for hope, for a better world. "This next one," John said softly into the microphone, "means more to me than anything I've ever written." The crowd knew what was coming. You could feel the anticipation building like a wave about to break. Imagine. John placed his fingers on the keys. The opening notes filled Madison Square Garden with a sound so pure, so familiar, that grown men started wiping their eyes. But what nobody in that arena knew, what John himself didn't know, was that in exactly 47 seconds, something was going to happen that would stop the entire concert. Something that would test everything John Lennon believed in about music, about performance, about connection. Something that would prove that the most powerful moments don't come from perfection. They come from what we do when everything falls apart. John was halfway through the first verse when it happened. "Imagine there's no heaven." His fingers moved across the keys with that familiar grace, that muscle memory built over thousands of performances. "It's easy if you try." And then, snap! A sound like a gunshot echoed through the arena. The C string on the piano had broken. John's hands froze above the keys. The music stopped. 20,000 people held their breath. For a moment, you could have heard a pin drop in Madison Square Garden. John looked down at the piano, then out at the audience, his expression unreadable. Charlie, his piano technician, was already running from backstage, panic visible on his face. The backup piano would take at least 15 minutes to wheel out and tune properly. 15 minutes of dead air. 15 minutes of losing the magic that had been building all night. John could see the stage manager in the wings, gesturing frantically. "Stall them," the man was mouthing. "We need time." But John Lennon didn't move from that piano bench. Instead, he did something that nobody expected. He smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not an embarrassed smile. A genuine, almost amused smile that seemed to say, "Well, isn't this interesting?" "Ladies and gentlemen," John said into the microphone, his voice calm and conversational. "It appears my piano has decided to go on strike. Can't say I blame it, really. Been working pretty hard tonight." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. Charlie reached the piano, assessed the damage, and leaned in to whisper to John. "At least 15 minutes, John. Maybe 20. I'm so sorry." John nodded, then looked back out at 20,000 faces staring at him, waiting to see what would happen next. This was the moment that would have broken most performers, the moment that would have sent them backstage apologizing while crew scrambled to fix the problem. But John Lennon had never been most performers. Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, Leave that powerful like that helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. John stood up from the piano bench and walked to the edge of the stage. The spotlight followed him like it always had, like it always would. "You know," he said, his voice taking on that reflective quality that had made his interviews legendary. "I spent 5 years away from this. 5 years not performing, not touring, not doing any of this." The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. People thought I was crazy. My label thought I was throwing away my career. Critics said I'd be forgotten. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. But I did it because I wanted to be there when my son took his first steps. I wanted to hear his first words. I wanted to make him breakfast and put him to bed and just be a dad. John's voice cracked slightly on that last word. And you know what I learned in those 5 years? I learned that the most important music isn't always the kind you play on a stage. Sometimes it's the sound of your kid laughing, or the quiet of just sitting together, or the imperfect, messy, beautiful chaos of real life. He looked back at the broken piano. This piano breaking, 5 years ago, that would have terrified me. I would have seen it as a disaster, a failure, something that needed to be fixed immediately so the show could go on. John turned back to the audience. But now I see it differently. He walked back to the piano and sat down on the bench, his hands hovering over the keys. This piano has 87 working strings left, 87 notes that still want to sing. John pressed a key. A clear, perfect note rang out, and I'm thinking, maybe we don't need perfection. Maybe we just need to work with what we've got. Charlie, the technician, looked horrified. "John, you can't perform Imagine without a C note. It's literally in the melody, multiple times." John smiled at him. "Watch me, Charlie." What John Lennon did next had never been done before in the history of major concert performances. He began to play Imagine again, but this time he played it differently. Every time the melody called for that broken C string, John improvised around it. He'd shift to a different note, create a new harmony, sometimes just letting the silence speak where the note should have been. And somehow, impossibly, it was beautiful. At first, the audience didn't know what to make of it. This wasn't the Imagine they knew. This wasn't the perfect recording they'd listened to 1,000 times. This was something else entirely. Something raw, something vulnerable, something real. John's voice came in over the modified melody, and there was something different about it too. He wasn't performing anymore. He was sharing. He was confessing. The lyrics took on new meaning when sung over an imperfect piano by a man who'd chosen to embrace the brokenness rather than hide it. In the third row, a woman named Sarah Chen started crying. Sarah was a music teacher from Brooklyn who'd almost not come to the concert. 3 months ago, she'd been in a car accident that had damaged the nerves in her left hand. The doctor said she'd never play piano the same way again. She'd been devastated. Her entire identity had been built around playing perfectly, and now, with her hand damaged, she felt like she had nothing left to offer. But watching John Lennon transform Imagine on a broken piano, he's showing us it's not about being perfect, Sarah whispered to her husband. It's about making something beautiful anyway. In the balcony section, a veteran named Marcus Williams sat with tears streaming down his face. Marcus had come back from Vietnam with both legs below the knee missing. He'd spent 2 years in depression, believing he was broken beyond repair, believing he had nothing left to contribute. But watching John work around those missing notes, creating something new from what remained, "He's not pretending it's not broken," Marcus said to himself. "He's showing that broken things can still make music." All around Madison Square Garden, people were having similar realizations. The cancer survivor who thought her scars made her ugly. The widower who believed his heart was too damaged to love again. The student who'd failed out of college and felt like a failure. the immigrant who felt broken by a system that didn't value her. They were all watching John Lennon prove that brokenness didn't mean the end of beauty. It meant the beginning of something real. John reached the bridge of the song, the part where the melody climbs, where the hope builds, where everything is supposed to come together in perfect harmony. But the broken C string meant that perfect harmony was impossible. John paused. His hands hovered over the keys. For 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds, there was complete silence. 20,000 people barely breathing. And then John looked up at the audience with tears in his eyes. "I can't play this part the way it's supposed to be played," he said simply. "The notes aren't there anymore." He let that truth hang in the air. "Maybe you could help me." John began playing the simplified version of the bridge with his right hand. And then he did something that would become legendary in concert history. He started conducting the audience with his left hand. "You know the melody," he said. "You've known it for years, so sing it. Sing the part I can't play." For a moment, nobody moved. And then, from somewhere in the back of the arena, a single voice started singing. Then another, then 10, then 100. Then all 20,000 people in Madison Square Garden were singing the bridge of Imagine, while John Lennon played what he could and conducted what he couldn't. The sound was overwhelming. Not perfect, not polished, not like any recording that would ever be made, but real, so incredibly, devastatingly real. John's hands moved across the broken piano, pulling out every note that still worked, while 20,000 voices filled in the gaps with a harmony that no single instrument could ever create. In that moment, Imagine stopped being a song about what could be. It became proof of what was already here. People connecting, people creating together, people making beauty out of brokenness. When the song ended, the silence lasted for exactly 3 seconds. And then Madison Square Garden erupted in a sound that wasn't quite applause and wasn't quite crying. It was something in between. Something that sounded like 20,000 hearts breaking open at the same time. John sat at that broken piano, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. He was crying, not performing emotion, not playing for sympathy, just crying. Because in that moment, he understood something he'd been searching for during those 5 years away from the stage. He understood why music mattered. Not because it was perfect, not because it was polished, not because it made money or won awards or impressed critics, but because it connected broken people with other broken people and reminded them they weren't alone. "Thank you," John said into the microphone, his voice rough. "Thank you for singing with me. Thank you for being willing to make music out of what's broken." The crowd was on its feet, but it wasn't a typical standing ovation. People were hugging strangers, holding hands with people they'd never met, creating a moment of community that transcended the usual performer-audience divide. Sarah Chen, the music teacher with the damaged hand, turned to her husband. "I'm going back to teaching," she said firmly. "I'm going to teach my students that making music isn't about having perfect technique. It's about having something to say." Marcus Williams, the veteran, pulled out his phone and called his sister for the first time in 6 months. "I'm sorry I've been so isolated," he said when she answered. "I was so focused on what I'd lost that I forgot about what I still have." All around the arena, people were making decisions, having realizations, choosing to see their own brokenness differently. And John Lennon, sitting at that broken piano, could feel it. The shift in energy, the transformation, the proof that sometimes the most important thing you can do is show people that it's okay to be imperfect. "I'm going to finish the show," John said, "on this broken piano, because honestly, I don't want a perfect one anymore. This one's telling the truth." And he did. For the next 45 minutes, John performed his entire set on that damaged instrument, working around the missing note, creating new arrangements on the spot, inviting the audience to fill in gaps whenever they appeared. It was messy. It was imperfect. It was the best concert he'd ever given. The story of that night spread fast. By the next morning, every newspaper in New York was running the story. Lennon turns broken piano into message of hope. Imperfect performance becomes perfect moment. The night music broke and healed at the same time. But the real story wasn't in the newspapers. It was in the letters. Thousands of them. Letters from people who'd been in that arena. Letters from people who'd only heard about it. Letters from people who needed to tell John what that moment had meant to them. A woman who'd survived breast cancer and felt like her body was broken. A man who'd lost his job and felt like a failure. A teenager who'd come out to parents who rejected her and felt like she'd never be whole again. A soldier dealing with PTSD who thought he was too damaged to ever come home. They all wrote to say the same thing. You showed me that broken things can still make beautiful music. John kept every letter, and when reporters asked him about that night, about the broken piano and the decision to keep playing, he always said the same thing. I didn't plan it. I didn't think it through. I just decided that maybe the crack is where the light gets in. The piano itself became famous. Madison Square Garden refused to fix it. They kept it exactly as it was that night, with the broken C string still dangling, and they brought it out for special occasions. A reminder, a symbol, proof that perfection is overrated and brokenness is just another word for real. John Lennon went on to perform many more concerts. But people who were there that September night in 1975 always said the same thing. That was the one that mattered. That was the one that changed how we saw everything. Because John didn't just perform a concert that night. He taught 20,000 people how to live with their brokenness, how to make music anyway, how to let other people fill in the gaps they couldn't reach alone. And somewhere in New York City, in a music classroom in Brooklyn, Sarah Chen teaches her students about that night. She tells them about the broken C string, about the improvisation, about the moment when 20,000 people became one voice. And then she shows them her damaged hand and says, "This is my broken string, but I'm still making music, because that's what we do. We don't wait for perfect. We work with what we have. And we let other people help us with what we don't." The story of John Lennon and the broken piano is told at music schools and therapy sessions and support groups all over the world. Not because it's a story about a famous person, but because it's a story about what happens when we stop pretending we're not broken, when we stop hiding the damage, when we start making music with what remains. John Lennon proved something that night that every person needs to know. The broken string doesn't ruin the song. Sometimes it makes the song finally tell the truth. And 20,000 hearts learned that truth together. On a September night in New York City, when music broke and healed at exactly the same time. If this story of transformation and resilience moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their brokenness doesn't define them. Have you ever experienced the moment when something imperfect turned out to be exactly what you needed? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more true stories about the moments that reveal the beauty in being human.